All right, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for our fortnightly Zoom. As for those of you that haven't met Ed before, I'll just do a quick bio that I won't go through the entire thing like we did last time because I think most people have met him. But for those of you that don't know, Ed has been a dear mentor of mine for since 2005, and he's been in the leadership development space and has been a global leader in that area for the last 25 years. He currently works for JP Chase Morgan Bank, and he's had speaking engagements around the world, Cambridge, in London. He's spoken in Africa, Canada, the US. And specifically, Ed's trademark includes his penetrating insight, his clarity of vision, and lucid delivery. And he has an incredible way of merging, I would say, Eastern wisdom and making it relevant for modern times. So me personally, I've gained so much from his time and his mentorship over the years. And I know everyone else enjoyed the first session. So we'd like to welcome Ed again to the Titan Forum. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you very much. It's great to see those people who were able to make it to the last session that we did. And also it's wonderful to meet those who are here for the first time in terms of this particular subject. So I just want to begin by saying welcome to Mohammed, to Tiffany, let's see, Ami, Eleanor, I can see quite a few names, Christina, Data, Marco, and then obviously Dunya. It was really great to meet Avni. We were having a conversation just earlier, so it was wonderful. Enver, very good to see you again as well. So we're going to continue, but what we're going to do before is just to get everyone up to speed on where we left off. So we were talking about self-leadership and legacy. This is a big word. This idea of leaving something that stands the test of time and that can also be of inspiration and like a guiding light or a compass to others. Okay, so I'm going to share my slides. We're just going to run through some of the previous slides, and I'm going to invite those who were here last session. If there's anything you want to just share, something that you recalled, something that you remembered, it's also a good exercise, because according to neuroscience, whenever we repeat what we've learned, whenever we share it with other people, it deepens the neurological pathways, which is actually that remembrance. And it is like installing a new habit. Literally, the activity of remembering and sharing is also a process of transformation in which we get to understand that same knowledge or insight from different angles or perspectives. And as that neurological pathway deepens, we're more likely to imbibe that new behavior as part of our own character. So in this whole process, in our discussions, intimately connected with what we're discussing is literally the process of transformation, okay? So we're gonna do this. Before I share the slides, I'm just gonna pause and I'm gonna ask, and you can just raise your hands, anything that you recall. This is not a test, I repeat, this is not a test, so there's no pressure, but we would love to hear from the audience, those who attended the previous session, just anything that stood out for you, that resonated with you, anything that you've been reflecting on or doing since we had our last session. And if you want to say anything, just give us some kind of sign, and then we'll hand over to you to share something that you'd like to share. So if you'd like to share anything, just raise your hand, raise your voice, and then we'd like to hear from you. And by the way, just no pressure, but I can see everyone's names as well. It's no pressure, no pressure. Enver, please, over to you.
Only very short. You gave us a homework, but I am carrying it still with me, and I didn't do that. Oh. Thank you very much, but I am sorry.
Okay, no worries. We will come to that, but at least you put the cards on the table, so I very much respect that, Enver. Thank you for that. I'm going to throw it out to others. Anyone from our last discussion, anything that you remember before we go through the slides? Who would like to share anything that stood out, anything that they recall from our last session?
So Ed, I remember you were talking about the approach that you took something from the Bhagavad Gita, and you were talking about how the lessons is shared on dealing with the ups and downs of life, specifically unknowns. And specifically, you commented on the key that it shared with everyone on dealing with unknowns was, first of all, like being content within yourself, but by creating a framework in your life to deal with uncertainty, right? And so you shared with us just the components of your day, and you talked about how the first part of your day is about self-care. The second part of your day is about service, which is your work, and the third part of your day, which has a social aspect. And you just talked about a framework and how we can use creating a framework in our life as a way to deal with uncertainty specifically. So that's something that I recall.
Fantastic. Thank you for sharing that. We'll touch upon that again a bit later on. Any other comment before we get into it? Any other comments? Doesn't have to be. I'm just giving an opportunity. Okay, so what I'm going to do is, oh yes, Avni, please. I saw your hand. If you could unmute.
Just to agree with what Rikin said, is that have certain practices to help you in uncertainty. And you also said everything we do makes ripples in the world, as above and below. As above. What was that? As above, as below, as above. Is that what you wrote? I don't know what you wrote. But everything we do has.
Yeah.
Sorry?
I was saying it's about the microcosm and the macrocosm, how we're always intimately connected to the whole. That was what we were talking about. As above, so below.
Yes. And that the leader is not a person of destiny, it's a person of action. Yes.
Fantastic. Thank you very much for that, Avni. Great memory, by the way. So it's very impressive. Okay. Oh, you have notes? Okay. You have your notebook? That's even better. So what we said in the previous session, and I'm going to say this again, you may want to get out pen and paper or something to write with. Okay. As we go through the session, this session is like a good restaurant. You go into a good restaurant, there are so many things on the menu, but not everything will attract your attention. Okay. So in the philosophy of the Bhagavad Gita, they talk about being personal, and that ultimate reality is very personal. The idea here being that as we go through any training session, discussion, interaction, some things are more relevant than others. So as we go through the session, please do two things. Tune into your hearing. So you keenly hear what we're discussing, but I'm going to ask you also just as keenly to tune into your heart. Okay, so you're going to tune into your sense of hearing and tune into your heart. And we're going to work on a maxim. The maxim we're going to work on is that as we go through, anything that particularly resonates with you is meant for you. Okay, I repeat that. As we go through the session, anything that particularly resonates with you, take it that this is particularly, all of it could be relevant, but this is particularly relevant for you. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to share my slides. We're going to recap where we went on the journey from the last session. We'll just quickly flash some of those slides, and we'll get to the 10 principles of empowered leadership, which is where we ended the last session, and then we will speak on from that particular point. Okay. So share my screen, and then we will go. See. Yes. Okay. So, self-leadership and legacy. This is the discussion that we were having in our last session. Okay, so we were talking about a number of different points. We touched upon the benefits of self-leadership and leaving a legacy. We all have a leadership brand. We want that brand to be strong. We want to be able to build capacity and be more efficient. We want to develop the team, and we want to develop ourselves. When there's proper self-leadership and legacy, we open the space for innovation, for new ways of looking at the world, new ways of thinking about the world, and ultimately all of these feed into how we construct and establish our legacy. Okay, moving forward. We spoke about how we learn, and we ended on this point that 95% is taken in when we also share what we're hearing. So this is the idea of bringing you into the conversation. It's not something that's being done to you, but the conversation is being done with you. Okay, so we're going to continue that modus operandi as we go through. We talked about some of the things or some of the experiences people are facing. Uncertainty, issues in relationship, so many different factors that are playing out in people's lives all over the world right now. And we also touched upon how this is very much related to, I'm going to show my camera. We talked about how this is very much related to an orientation, a way of seeing the world and a way of dealing with the world. Especially when we deal with the world in a way whereby we are very dependent or overly dependent on externals. That then means that whatever changes happen externally will completely or have the potential to really shake us or move us away from our center. Okay, so moving on from there, we asked, what does the future hold? And we really flipped the question to this one. How do I hold the future? The idea being that we can either be the person who's on the receiving end of circumstances, or we can be literally co-creators with life itself. That by having knowledge and by applying knowledge, we can really turn the question mark into a conscious movement forward. Okay. We defined this idea of a legacy, something that's transmitted or received from an ancestor or predecessor or from the past, but we can leave an effect in the world, which can be literally a signpost for future generations. Okay, this is what we mean when we talk about constructing a legacy. And we got to this particular point. This is the how, okay? 10 principles of empowered leadership. And in particular, we explained where these principles came from. The idea here being that it's not just another set of ideas from an individual, but how the Vedic literature, which is one of the ancient sources of knowledge and wisdom for human society, explains literally a science of leadership. In the ancient world, there was a class of leadership, a class of, leaders, front runners in society, and they were called Raj Rishis. So they were great leaders, but they were also great thinkers. So this idea of Rishi, the idea of being a very wise individual, literally a thought leader. So they were leaders in society, a social leader and a thought leader at the same time. So what we're drawing on is particularly coming from a literature called the Mahabharata, which is a very powerful and very ancient treatise. It was an epic series of events that happened in the lives of two dynasties, the Pandavas and the Kauravas. Within the Mahabharata, there's a battle that took place, the Battle of Kurukshetra. And within the battle, there's a conversation between two great leaders. One is named Yudhisthira, and the other person is named Bhishmadev. And so in the exchange, we hear some of the insights through this exchange, which is one of the oldest treaties or dialogues on leadership. So these 10 principles of empowered leadership come from that discussion. And what we asked you to do, actually, I'm going to ask someone to share what we asked you to do in the homework. I'm just going to stop the share for a moment and see if anyone actually remembers what I asked you to do homework-wise and who did the homework. Okay, so let me just pause. First of all, what was the homework? I'm hoping to hear from someone on the group. My fingers are crossed that someone recalls what we asked you to do, and then we'll get into the experiences that people had in doing the homework. So who recalls what the homework was?
Avni, you want to go ahead?
Yeah, let me answer this because I didn't do the homework. Sorry, Ed, I was unfortunate. But basically, you asked us to go through these 10 principles and actually give it to somebody else to rate how we are as a leader according to these 10 principles. Yeah. So what type of leader do they think, their opinion of how we lead according to these 10 principles?
Absolutely. And thank you for that. So there was a specific reason why we asked you to get the perspective of others. See, what happens often in any sphere of life is that we will have a view of ourselves. It's very interesting. It is understood that in child psychology, I know we touched upon this before, but it's such an interesting topic. In child psychology, the question comes up, how does the child understand their own character? How do they understand who they are? How do they understand their strengths, their development areas? So it is well known in child psychology that the child's sense of self is formed in relationship with others, especially parents. So when that parent or those parents hold a safe space to the child, when they pay attention to the child, and when they reflect back to the child's own qualities, right? So, oh, you seem a bit upset, or I noticed that you did this very, very well. I can see you have a talent in this particular area. The child in that relationship starts to understand more about themselves. So you can call this the mirror effect. And that effect continues to play out throughout our lives, okay? So we may perceive ourselves one way, but in the process of understanding how we are perceived by others, we can gain confirmation about certain things. We can also gain an understanding of potential development areas, or we may gain a perspective about expression. Now, let me explain this. Someone may be good at something, but they may not be able to convey that quality, that talent, that knowledge in a way that is accessible for other people. So what's happening? Other people are responding to us based upon how we come across to them, independently of how we may or may not be. One of my mentors put it very nicely. He told me once, he said that communication is not so much about transmission as it is about reception. In other words, it's not so much about what you say as much as it's about how other people are receiving that particular communication. So we asked you to do this, let's say, exercise where you were getting some perspective from people who are around you in these 10 key areas of leadership, okay? So the 10 areas of leadership. So number one was concern for others, okay? So to what degree do I come across as being concerned for the welfare of other people? Number two, to what extent am I perceived to provide psychological safety, a space where people feel secure? Because The study has also shown something very interesting on this point. As businesses now are increasingly competitive, and as they are increasingly looking to see how to be more productive, more efficient, and especially how to innovate, it is increasingly being understood that the companies which allow the greatest or have the greatest innovation are also companies where the employees feel the greatest degree of psychological safety. Because if people feel that they are constantly under threat, they go into what we call fight, flight, or freeze mode. Okay, so they try to protect themselves. And in that particular space, their concern is just getting the job done, getting the minimum done so that they don't become a target of someone else's negativity. Now, contrast that with an organization where people feel secure, they feel safe. What happens in those organizations is that people are much more open. They'll share new ideas, new processes, new learning, new research. Why? Because it's a safe space to try new things. There's no danger that if I try something new and it doesn't work out, I won't be labeled, I won't be blamed, I won't be minimized, I won't be criticized. So therefore, they're constantly innovating. They're constantly looking at what can we do better. Innovation can be new ideas, new products, new services. It can also be new processes. It can be new ways of presenting, understanding, knowledge, etc. It could be looking at new sectors, new demographics to serve. So as a leader, you want to create the space that allows people to feel safe so that they can innovate and try new things. I'm going to share actually my slides again as we continue this conversation. So bear with me 1 second. So, continuing this theme. So the third one, empowered leadership, is leadership where there's a focus on creating lasting value. This links to brand identity. So if you create a product which is of low value and you put it on the market, the initial experience will be positive because there's something new. But as people get to grips with the fact that the new product is not of deep value, then the reputation starts to go down. There's a tendency, therefore, to start to think, okay, we can't trust this person because what they produce is not of such a good quality or good standard. I was just thinking about this point in relation to Apple. So many of us interact with Apple products. And when people examine why Apple has been so successful, one of the reasons for their success is simply that they produce products which have a certain quality to them. Okay. So just as the product has a certain deeper quality in terms of, let's say, the quality of the materials, in terms of the simplicity or the intuitive way in which such products can be used, whatever it is, even the feeling of the materials, all of these points have an effect on the mind of the consumer. And therefore, the product, Apple, the brand, starts to have a lasting connotation. And what this does as a result is it makes people feel that, yes, I can trust this brand. And what it does is it creates a relationship. It's no longer something I just use on a one-time basis, but I start to develop a relationship with that particular brand. And of course, a long-term relationship with a particular brand is one of the key markers of a legacy. So let's carry on. We'll again show the screen and we'll look at the other principles of empowered leadership. Okay, number 4, the leader conveys truth. Because if I'm honest and I'm seen to be honest, then people understand who I am, they know where they stand, and that builds relationship also. Number 5, character is power. So this is the idea of having some integrity, okay? There's some strength of character. There's some ability to stand by something even when challenged. Okay, so character is power. There are also universal principles that determine our action. So number 6, principle-centeredness. This plays into the idea of fairness. If my decisions are always arbitrary, if I have no standards by which I live, then today I may treat you nicely. Tomorrow, I may treat you in a very negative way because I'm just acting on expediency rather than acting on principle. Okay, number 7, the leader is a powerful visionary. They have a vision of the future that includes other people. Okay, so this is a powerful visionary. Number 8, they engage people by ability. So they are able to understand the strengths of another person and to give them opportunities that play to those strengths. So engaging by ability. Linked to that is the ability to delegate and empower to people. So what is empowerment? Empowerment means that you give people what they need to do a great job. It can be time, it can be resources, but there's also an emotional component, the encouragement, the recognition, visibility, whatever it is. Different types of empowerment relate to different people and different situations. And last but by no means least, this idea of servant leadership. So I'm leading with the well-being of everyone else in mind. I'm leading in such a way that everyone grows through the offering, through the product, through the service, and the journey that went into creating that product or service. So this is the idea of servant leadership, and these are 10 principles of empowered leadership, okay? And so I'm gonna stop the screen here. And before I go any further, I'm gonna ask, are there any questions on those principles of empowered leadership that we just went through? Any questions? If there are, I'm going to ask you to unmute and just ask any questions that you want on these principles before we take it a step into a further discussion.
Tiffany has a question.
So Ed, what do you mean? It's great to hear you, by the way. It's wonderful. But principle-centeredness.
Yes.
If you can expand on that.
Absolutely. So first of all, thank you for your question, Tiffany. It's great to connect with you. So in terms of principles, there's research, and I think I touched upon this last time, what it's called SCARF. So it's some research which was done by the Neuro Leadership Institute. And they explained that there are different domains or different areas or values which are important to people. And so let's say, for example, Tiffany, let's say that fairness was particularly important to you. If that's a principle that's particularly important to you. So if you're treated fairly within a particular context, personal life, professional life, a particular project, whatever it is, then it creates a toward state. Because fairness is important and you are treated fairly, it builds the relationship. Now, the opposite is also true. If fairness is particularly important to you, and there was an instance where you had done some work for a project and someone else took the credit for your work, it would be upsetting to anyone, but it would be more damaging in the relationship between that person and you, because fairness is a particularly strong principle or value that you hold dear. So principle-centeredness is the idea that the leader makes decisions consistently based upon certain values. If the leader is just situational and doesn't have a sense of principle-centeredness, then in one instance, I know that I can get a greater outcome if I mistreat someone or ignore someone. And because I'm so much concerned about the ends, about the outcome, and I don't care so much about the means, about the principle, about the journey to the outcome, then what you start to see in such an environment or in a company is that people are treated very, very unfairly. Because I only care about the outcome. So if it's expedient to cheat you, then I'm going to cheat you on this occasion because I can get more. And then if it's not expedient, then I'll be nice to you. But you know, oh, he's only nice to me if he can get something. It's not a principle to treat people fairly. It's not a principle to treat people respectfully. It's just done when there's something to gain. And when there's nothing to gain, people are completely mistreated. So what that does in the environment is people start to see that it's situational ethics. It is all about the outcome, and we don't care about the individual, which again creates a psychological unsafety, a psychologically unsafe environment. And then people start to leave. People start to be more, let's say, in survival mode. People start to go into groups. You start to get more politics because there's an in-group and there's an out-group, right? There's those people who are on the good side of this person because they're getting stuff done. And there are those people who are not being treated properly because they may be offered something different. So you start to get this lack of congruence. You start to get this, unequal environment. You start to get inequalities because people are not feeling that they're going to be treated well just because they deserve to be treated well. They're treated well only if they achieve some outcome. And if they don't, or let's put it another way, they may not even be like that. They may be all getting outcomes, but this person's treated well because I can gain something from him in the moment. And this person, they're doing their work, but because I can't gain something right here and right now, I may treat them in a very negative way. So it's the idea of a leader having principles by which they deal with everyone, rather than having a kind of manipulative or exploitative mentality based upon whatever they can quickly achieve in the moment. Does that help to clarify, Tiffany, what I mean by principle-centeredness?
Wonderful, very clear, yes.
Thank you very much. Okay.
May we use the word inclusion for this as well?
You can use inclusion, but it's more than inclusion. Okay. It's more than inclusion. It's relating to a sense of fairness. If I've got a set of principles that I use in my dealings with everyone, if I'm respectful because it's a principle, not just when I can get something. If I'm inclusive because it's a principle, not just when I can get something. If I'm, whatever quality, if I say that this is a principle that I treat everyone with, then it creates much more of a teamship and an environment where everyone can be at their best. So inclusion is a dimension, but it's not just about inclusion. Any other questions, please? If you have any questions, you can unmute and speak if you have a question. If not, I will move on.
Ed, I had one question. I was looking at principle number 9.
Okay.
And,
Yes.
This principle of delegation, I feel as leaders, there are times where we should perform, the duty or the task at hand, and there's times where we should delegate. And can you speak to, kind of differentiating the two? Because I think there's many leaders who want to do everything for themselves, and then there's also some leaders that delegate too much.
Absolutely. So it requires us to be really honest with ourselves. I remember my own mentor spoke about this. He he talked about the importance of a leader knowing where their strengths are, knowing where their development areas are, and knowing how to collaborate to create a synergy. What you sometimes have are people who are not honest with themselves about their strengths and weaknesses, and who are not honest with themselves about their capacity also. So you also delegate according to capacity, because every individual can only do so much, okay? So one of the things, and I think we've spoken about this before, Rick, that when I look at teamship, I look at character, competence, and capacity. Okay, I repeat this because it's a very simple model, but this is incredibly useful and effective in terms of how you lead. So I look at character, competence, and capacity. So in a team, ideally, you want people with good character, because then we can have open and honest discussion, and we can deal with the issue rather than insulting the person. Okay? If I've got good character, I'm not trying to undermine you. I'm not trying to put you down. I want what is best for the service. Okay? Where organizations fail miserably is where there's bad character. Because where there's bad character, there's politics. Because someone may say something about the project, but really it's not about the project. What they're doing is they're looking for an excuse to criticize someone. They're looking for an excuse to undermine someone. And so there's two levels of communication. I'm saying that this work wasn't quite where I thought it would be. But what I'm really saying, the subtext is I'm using this as an opportunity to put you down because you're the one who did the work. So I look for character, then competence. To your point, Rick, about delegation, you play to people's strengths where possible. You also play to people's opportunities. So someone may not be strong in a particular area, but they have a hunger, a motivation, and an interest to get better in that particular area. So you may delegate the task to them along with someone who's strong. So they are acting as someone who's involved in that particular endeavor. They're not as strong, but that's okay because they're partnering with someone who is strong. And in the process, they're also learning. They're also growing. I'm constantly challenging leaders about what we call key person dependency. The idea that if you were ill, can your team pick up that activity? Or is it that you're the only one who knows how to do this and you haven't been cross-training? You haven't been showing other people. You haven't been having other people assist you so that they learn how you do it. Okay, so character, competence, and the third one is if you want to delegate, they have to have capacity. So many times in projects, we see people who are very enthusiastic, but they don't have the time. You see, they don't have the time. And in their enthusiasm, they're not honest and they're not recognizing their limitations of time. What will happen a bit later on is there'll be frustration because when they're not doing what they need to do, other people are also being held back. Okay, so in order to get this project happening, I need to take certain material, certain research, certain connections, certain resources from you. So you're meant to do part one. But because you don't have capacity, you're slow to do part one. So now I'm meant to take over at part two. Now I'm becoming frustrated. I'm becoming frustrated because part one is not being done, or it's not being done on time, or it's not being done to the relevant standard. And therefore my work is now being impeded. It's being slowed down. So these three areas, character, competence, and capacity. When you're looking at how to delegate, you want to consider these factors in terms of who you give something to and how much you give to them. You also want to consider communication. What's the check-in? How often are you going to check in? Are they going to be communicating with you about how things are going? Are you going to be chasing them? The whole communication process is also a factor. So these are some of the really important things to take into account when you want to delegate in a way that is really first class. Okay, you don't really want to be chasing people. You want rather, if you're the leader, you want to delegate in such a way that you create a cadence whereby the person who's doing the project, they're updating you on a regular basis. So these are some of the things to consider. Ricken, does that answer your question?
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, no problem. Are there any other questions that people would like to ask before we share a bit more about this idea of self-leadership and legacy?
Ami has a question.
Hi, Ed. I have a question.
Ami. Yes.
Thank you so much for diving into that. By the way, the C's were really, really great. I have a question around number 1, and it is around the concern for others. So it's, wanting to have that the well-being for others, coming from a genuine place. But how do you distinguish between, or do you distinguish between compassion versus empathy in there? And how do you separate out some of those principles?
Wonderful question. Thank you, Ami. So yes, we've been speaking about compassion and empathy a lot over the past 12 months, but it's something that should be in the DNA of all good leaders. So how do we understand this? So I will give you my definition. Different people will use these terms in slightly different ways. Empathy for me is the ability to put yourself in the shoes of the other person, to understand how they are seeing and experiencing the world. Okay, so the empathy has a lot to do with perspective and understanding how someone is experiencing the world at this moment. Now, compassion is something slightly different. Compassion is the active behavior to provide resources or actions which will help an individual in a situation that they're in. Okay, so especially a situation of need. So empathy is the understanding, and compassion is the activity of helping to alleviate some kind of need that an individual has. Okay, so one is perspective and the other is activity. That's how I differentiate between the two things. Okay, so does that answer your question, first of all, Ami, in terms of how these things are understood, or
Yes,
is
it
it,
does.
do you need
Thank
some
you.
more clarification?
It's clear.
Okay,
Thank
no
you.
problem. Thank you very much. And it's something that we need to do for other people. It is also something we need to do for ourselves. Okay, let's actually take it in this direction, because this relates to the idea of self-leadership, and also how we're gonna bring that through to other people as well. So you can see on the screen the importance of being great. G, R, E, A, and T. So this is a very simple model for self-care. And this model is absolutely essential if we want to have resources that we can use for other people. And when I talk about resources, I'm speaking here about internal resources. The more that a leader builds their resources inside, the better they are at leading outside. Okay, we spoke about this in the last session.
Ed, are you sharing the presentation?
Yes, can you see it or not?
No.
Okay, let me try again. Let me try this again. Okay, can you see the slide now?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Yes, we can. Thank you.
No problem. So you'll see here 5 factors. We spoke about this in our last session, and it's very, very powerful and important to understand. There's an intimate connection between the internal state and the external performance. Many leaders, with all the responsibilities that come upon them, they start to burn out or minimize certain inner capacities. And you can map the inner capacities which are being lost and the outer performance. We'll go to those capacities in a moment. These 5 areas are important to build internal capacity. So the G stands for gratitude, okay? If we're not grateful, then what tends to happen is you don't notice what people are doing. You don't notice how hard they're trying. And therefore, we miss an opportunity to empower people. When people are doing their best and you catch people doing their best, they become inspired to do even more. So literally, the capacity of your organization, the capacity of your project can be increased just by this gratitude. This idea of recognizing and appreciating and feeling grateful for what people are doing. Number two, the R stands for routine. The more that we are aligned in our own habits, the more that we can be the steady force, the stable force in a changing world. So one simple way that we can do this is through our routine. Having the right routine, waking, sleeping at the right times can help to set what we call the circadian rhythms. I know that Rick will have heard of all this term also in medicine. So you have an internal biology which has a certain cadence or a certain rhythm. And by living in line with the natural cycles a little bit more, having a bit of a regular routine, regular exercise in the morning, regular eating times, regular sleeping times, you will find that it gives emotional and mental stability, groundedness, and centeredness, which then maps into making more centered and therefore more effective solutions. So the R stands for routine, and I'll give you a little bit of information on that as we go through the session today. The E stands for embrace. We do not function best alone. I really want to stress this. There was some incredible research I was doing on this topic. So I'm not sure if I mentioned this in our last session. There was some research, and this was research around women who had some kind of tumor, but the tumor was benign. It hadn't become cancerous. They looked at women who had the tumor. It was a benign tumor, but they felt alone. Okay, so they looked at what happened to the tumor when those women felt alone and had this benign tumor. They compared that study to a group of women who also had a benign tumor and they were under stress. Okay, and they looked at what happened to the tumor under stress. They found something very, very interesting. If the women were just under stress, the tumor would not necessarily be more likely to become cancerous. If the women felt alone, the tumor was not necessarily more likely to become cancerous. But when those women were under stress and they felt alone, those tumors were 9 times more likely to become cancerous. So there's a lot of research around this. Research looking at this idea that we are literally psychosocial beings. That means that our psychology is heavily influenced by our relationships, our social dynamics, our environmental dynamics. So some people, they're actually a lot stronger because they are in good social dynamics. They have real well-wishing friends, real relationships where they know I can rely on them, they can rely on me. When people are in those environments, they become much stronger and they're able to do much more. Thank you for being on the call, Data. So when we have those good relationships, when we're not in isolation, when we're trying to do the best we can in good connection with real relationships, your strength increases many times over. Because the individual is always in a connection with others. There's always an interconnectedness. So this is what we mean by this idea of great. We talk about the embrace, meaning that it's really important to have that connect with other people and have the right level of personal and professional relationships, interrelational, where you're giving, you're taking, and that exchange is continuing. Number 4, the A stands for aim. It's important to have goals that we're regularly striving for, but those goals should be meaningful and they should be broken down into bite-sized chunks that we can achieve. Every time you achieve something, you actually regulate your own internal system, and you also release certain positive hormones into your own system. So this idea of achievement and aims are really important. And you can also set meaningful goals for your team. Last one, the T stands for togetherness. Now, this is the Swajati principle. Swajati is a Sanskrit word, which means like-minded. Okay? So you want to deal with people in such a way that you have a real sense of understanding where they're coming from and they're understanding where you're coming from. This is about the empathy, it's about the understanding, it's about compassion. So this idea of Swajati, it really brings people, diverse people, closer together, honoring each other, and we can encapsulate this in one term: unity with diversity. Okay? So these are some areas of self-care that you could build into your day-to-day schedule. Let's take it a step further. If we want to make a legacy, then in all of our dealings, we should also first try to understand where people are coming from. This is one of the key ingredients of empathy. We have to practice giving and also forgiving. This part is not so easy sometimes when we feel let down or hurt, etc. But if we're looking after ourselves properly, then because of a certain level of contentment I have within myself, it's easier to not hold on to negativity when we're dealing with each other. We need to learn from each other. This is really important. You can only learn so much by yourself. But if everyone in your team is constantly growing and developing and learning new things, then that sharing that happens in the team becomes explosive. You can upskill at a much faster rate than your competition. And this all falls into the last line, helping each other to be at their best. Okay, I'm going to share one or two more slides. I know we're going to finish. I told Ada that we'd finish slightly early today, but we're going to go on for about 15 more minutes, including your questions, and then we'll end. So the next slide, let's see. This is from Ayurveda. This gives you a schema that you can use in terms of how you plan your day, if you choose to. So I'll just mention one or 2 points. There's a crisis in the world now where many people are having to deal with different challenges in the mind. And these challenges can be at the most intense or at a slightly more light or superficial level. Ayurveda has an amazing understanding of the mind, which modern society and leaders can take advantage of. I'll just talk you through some of these points. So it's explained that different times of the day are ruled by different types of, let's say, energy. So in Ayurveda, 3 energies are mentioned. Vata, which is one type of energy, which rules between 2 a.m. and 6 a.m. Then you have Kapha, which is between 6 a.m. and 10 a.m. You have Pitta, which is between 10 a.m. and 2 p.m. Then it goes from 2 p.m. till 6 p.m. is Vata again. From 6 p.m. to 10 p.m. is Kapha. And then again from 10 p.m. to 2 a.m. you have Pitta. Now each particular period is particularly good for certain types of activity. It is recommended that people should try to be in bed by 10 p.m. because between 10 p.m. and 2 a.m., your body, if you're asleep, has the optimal opportunity to process the different emotions, thoughts, etc. If you don't sleep before 10 p.m., you can still process, but the process may not happen as deeply. You may not assimilate your day's experiences as deeply. So it's recommended that you sleep before 10 p.m. and you can arise before 6 a.m. And when you do, you will find that you arise with more of the Vata energy in the mind. So the mind is more lucid, it's more clear, it's more energized. And then you can use the morning period for, let's say, like breakfast, your task list, etc., especially between 10 a.m. and 2 p.m., the pitta energy is strong. And that energy is the best energy. It's the best period for strategizing, for dealing with challenging work, and also for lunch. Between 12 and 2 is the best period for lunch, because at that time, you're at the best point to digest your food as well. Okay, so these are just some ideas around timing. And I'll just go to one more point. We talked about different capacities. You have a physical capacity, a social emotional capacity, a mental capacity, and what we call a spiritual capacity. So physical just deals with your physical energy. Social emotional deals with your emotional energy, how much energy you have of compassion, empathy, and so on. Mental energy deals with your ability to, make decisions, to think, to analyze. And spiritual energy has a lot to do with your energy around having a greater, or let's say transcendent purpose to your life. And that spiritual energy is especially nourished by certain kinds of meditation, mindfulness, etc. So you should be very conscious, not just as an individual, but in your teams, to look and see where the energy is. How physically recharged are they? How emotionally and socially together are they? How mentally together? And where relevant, how spiritually together? Because the more you and your teams have these capacities at a high level of energy, the more that you can achieve fantastic outcomes as an organization, as a team, as a project. Okay, so I'm going to pause there and I'm going to open up for any questions. Do we have any questions from the class for the next, let's say, 10 minutes or so? If you have a question, you can just unmute and feel free to ask. I can't necessarily see everyone, so I'm just gonna ask, are there any questions from anyone on the group about anything we said so far?
And I was just
Can
wondering,
everyone hear?
from the model that you presented on Kapha Vata Pitta, maybe just, I'm not sure if you explained, like, maybe some of the terms like Agni, what that means.
Absolutely. So just to recap, so there are 3 different energies in Ayurveda which affect the different times of the day. So we'll go through each of them. So first of all, Vata. Vata is an energy which is characterized by a very kind of lightness and movement. So the Vata energy, it could be encapsulated by an individual who just likes to speak and speak and speak and speak and likes to run around a lot. And it's a kind of very kind of mobile energy, an energy that's always on the move. Okay, so that's the Vata energy. Pitta energy will be best symbolized by fire. It's the energy of transformation and digestion. And then Kapha energy will be symbolized by the earth. It's a very stable, very grounding energy, but also quite a slow moving energy. So it's quite dense. So different times of the day, according to Ayurveda, and this is married to modern research also about how the body and mind work. You can do this as an experiment and it works incredibly well. So these 3 different energies are prominent at different times of the day. So when we engage in an activity and that activity corresponds to a particular type of energy that links to that activity, you find that you're more able to be effective in that particular way. So if we sleep before or between, let's say 6 p.m. and 10 p.m., studies have shown that you tend to have a greater quality of sleep. The sleep tends to be more deep and more restorative. So my own mentor, he writes about this in one of his books on leadership. And he points out that the hours before midnight are worth more in terms of the rejuvenating effect on the mind and body than the hours after midnight. You see, so that means it potentially, you can have two people, they both sleep the same number of hours, but the level of restoration that they experience can be vastly different because of when they started that sleep period. Okay, so that's just something to bear in mind. And does that clarify the point about the different energies and the different times, Rikin? Does that help?
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you.
I have a question.
Hi, Ali.
I have a question. Yes. Thank you, Ed. I have a question. You were telling about these different time, let me call it time zones. Yes. My question is, also as a person, we also have these energies, right? So does it not depend on which one of those energies you have? And then is it for all types the same? That is basically the question. Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Ali. It's a very good question. So yes, just to elaborate, since you brought this up, but it is said in Ayurveda, which is one of the ancient systems of health and wellness, a very ancient system, an incredibly powerful one. It is said that different people have a different bodily constitution. So Ricken will know about this. My wife is by profession, she studied medicine. And I think also we have Palak, who's also on here, who has some knowledge in this field. So it is the case that different types of body are there. So in Western science, they call it ectomorph, mesomorph, and endomorph, different bodily types. But the points I just mentioned are basic rules of thumb. So sleeping before 10 or sleeping by 10 is good for all body types. Waking before 6 a.m. is again good for all body types. So it's actually, those are universal parameters, and those different energies, they relate to all body types in terms of the activities that particularly match that particular type of energy or that particular time period, Arlene. So does that clarify for you what I was saying?
Yes. Yeah, so it basically what you're saying, just for me to check if I understood, it's for all types, it is good. It's the same, basically. That's
yes, yes, yes.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, no problem at all. Yeah. Okay. Any other questions or comments? Anyone else with a question or comment? Tiffany?
I guess my comment is just, this is wonderful, Ed. So, you know, I'm definitely going to check out more of your materials. And Rican, I think this is, thank you so much for introducing. I'm definitely, you know, you asked, you know, what is resonating. There's been so many things today that I've learned from you, and just wonderful. So nice and wonderful to meet you.
Thank you very much. We love to share wisdom that can be practically applied. Okay, so everything we've shared with you is really about practical application. So we can do two things. We can understand where we are, and we can also start to apply some of these tools to get to where we could be. Okay, so on this point, what I'm going to ask you to do is as follows. I'm going to bring the slides back up. I'm just going to ask you to do an analysis. And this is something you can just do very quickly. You can see the screen with the 4 different dimensions. Okay, so think about your physical capacity at this moment in time. Okay, so meaning today. So where are you physically? How much do you feel a sense of energy and strength on the physical level? Give yourself a rating between 0 and 10. 10 means I feel strong, I feel energized, I feel, you know, strong physical capacity. And if you feel more, okay, I've been feeling tired, my energy levels aren't the same, you know, aren't where I think they could be, then give yourself a lower rating. So do that for physical energy. I want you to do the same for your social emotional energy. How much do I have a sense of, you know, being able to be there emotionally for other people? Are my emotional capacities high? Or is it like, you know, I just need some time to myself because I've been dealing with some emotional issues and my emotional energy is more drained? Okay, so think about that. And again, give yourself a rating out of 10. 10 is optimal, and then we have less than. Mental energy. Where are you in terms of your intellectual capacity? Your ability to think through, to kind of process, analyze, strategize. Where are you in that space? Okay, again, a rating out of 10. And last but not least, spiritual capacity. So we can take spiritual in a number of different ways. For those of you who may be on the spiritual path, Think about this in terms of your own spiritual practices. Okay, for those who may not be on a spiritual path, you could think about spiritual in terms of your contribution to something beyond yourself, whether it's volunteering, doing something in the community, whatever it is. So give yourself a rating out of 10 for each of these capacities, okay? And what I'm going to ask you to do as an activity for your own self, for your own benefit, is as you rate each of these areas, look and see which area needs more attention and try to think, what is an activity that I could do to build my capacity in that area? For example, if the physical capacity is low, it could be around exercise. I'm gonna make sure I do a bit more exercise, or it could be around diet. I'm gonna make sure I drink more water or eat more healthy, etc. Around social emotional, it could be spending time with friends who really care about you, who you really care about, and who inspire you and encourage you. Where it comes to, let's say, the mental capacity, it could be about learning new things, reading something, going on a course, learning something, building your intellectual capacity. And spiritual could be volunteering, it could be some kind of mindfulness practice, etc. Okay, I just want you to think about where your capacities are, how you can enhance those capacities, because your self-leadership directly maps out to your legacy. Okay, so I'm going to pause there, and we're almost at time. So I just want to say thank you, and I'm just going to maybe hand over to the host for any closing comments. But I'm happy to be in touch with any of you if you have any further questions, and I'm also happy to share the deck, the slides, with anyone who would find it useful.
So thank you so much, Ed, for joining us today. That was a really powerful session, and I could see that. I mean, we've been talking about some of these things for years, and it's always great just to peel the layers and go a little bit deeper. So thank you, and I'm sure a lot of people gained a lot of new things, and hopefully, if they knew some of this stuff, you know, again, took what they knew and went a little bit deeper. One thing I wanted to ask before we close is, do you have any other homework exercises that we could use for us to gain more traction for application of the information that was discussed today?
Absolutely. So I know that, and we know that everyone's incredibly busy. For those who did not do it from the last session, please do two things. One, rate yourself against these 10 principles of empowered leadership. So where do you feel that you are? So give yourself a rating out of 10 for each of those, whether you feel you're strong in that particular area or not. Give yourself a rating out of 10. So for example, number 1, concern for others. Do you feel, okay, I feel that I genuinely have real concern and understanding and empathy for other people, etc. You rate yourself high, etc. Number 2, get those who are close to you to give you a rating in these areas. And if they need to do it anonymously to be honest with you, then that's fine, okay? But do it and get an honest response and see where the perception and the reality may be different, and think, what can I do to improve at least the expression of that quality, if not to improve and become stronger in that particular area? That's what I would give as homework. Thank you very much.
Great. So I think on that note, we will wrap up if no one has any comments. I think I will personally try to, as you know, we have a book club that runs every Wednesday on the book of Dharma. And I think some of these things will be great to bring in to further the conversation and, you know, to increase the application. Because I think the more times we get to touch the information and more touch points we have, I think there's always a greater chance for uptake. Because, you know, as you know, that this information takes time and practice.
Absolutely.
Thank you very much.
Well, we're really grateful for your time, Ed. And yeah, please feel free to share the content after, and we look forward to staying in touch.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you very much, and wish you a very successful weekend. Take care.
Thank you. You too.
Thank you so much.
Have a nice
Thank
weekend.
you. Bye, guys.
Thank you. See you, everybody.